In this video, we're going to ask about what is physical. What do we mean when we say that something is physical? And you might think it's kind of obvious, but actually it's a little bit complicated, and so we're going to need to spend some time talking about it, particularly so that we can really understand what we mean when we say the mind is physical and what we mean when we deny that the mind is physical. So you might think that the physical is just material stuff, right? So like our bodies and trees and rocks and bodies of water and gases and so on. And certainly the physical includes material stuff, but this definition is a little too limited. So for example, consider light. Is light physical? Well, what is light? It's electromagnetic radiation, whatever exactly that is, and it's made up of what are called photons, which are light particles, which are sort of associated with the electromagnetic fields and whatever exactly those are. And light is definitely physical. It's part of the physical universe. It bumps into physical material stuff. It bounces off of it. It transmits energy to material stuff, right? That's why you're hot when you sit in the sun, or get warmer when you sit in the sun, and so on. So light's physical, but it's not sort of obviously like material stuff. So this definition is too limited. The idea that the physical is just material stuff. Physics discovers what's physical, and it discovers all sorts of weird stuff, including the idea that light is actually made up of little particles. So you might think, okay, well then let's say that maybe the physical is whatever is discovered by fundamental physics. And what might that be? Well, it would include, of course, light and photons. But it would include other stuff. So let's take your body. Well, your body is made up of organs and other materials, all of which are made up of cells, all of which are made up of molecules, all of which are made up of atoms. And atoms have pieces, two parts. This is a part of an atom smasher where they're huge, big circles, big circular tubes that accelerate. Particles get accelerated in, and they smash into each other and break up, and those collisions and the explosions that result from the collisions are studied by physicists to figure out, well, what those things we just smashed up, what are they made of? And there are all sorts of subatomic particles. So there are electrons, there are protons and neutrons in the nucleus of an atom, but those are themselves made up of things called quarks, and they're the photons that I've already mentioned. So physics discovers all of these, and these things are unbelievably tiny, right? They're super, 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 super small. Sort of beyond our ability, certainly to imagine. We can describe them using mathematics, but they're incredibly small. And not only are there these subatomic particles, but there are also forces and fields. There's gravity, which is a force that between any two objects that have mass, and there's the gravitational field within which all of that, which is created by the gravitational force. There's electromagnetism, which is a force. It's a combination of electricity and magnetism, and there are electrical and magnetic fields that are generated by electromagnetic force. There are weak and strong nuclear forces. The strong nuclear force, for example, is what holds protons and neutrons together in the nucleus of an atom, among other things. We don't need to remember the details of any of this, and I'm just brushing the surface here. The point is that the physical includes all of this stuff. It includes the subatomic particles, protons, and neutrons, and the quarks that make them up, and photons, and electrons, and all sorts of other weird stuff that's unbelievably small. And then the fields, the electromagnetic field, and the gravitational field, and the other fields which these particles live in, and the forces that are transmitted by those fields, gravity and electrical force and magnetic force, and so on. And then there's all the space that in between the particles. And actually, in some sense, almost all the space is empty. Particles occupy some tiny, tiny percentage of space. So your body is, in a certain sense, actually mostly empty space. And the particles that make up your body occupy a very small percentage of that space. So we might think, okay, well, what is the physical? Well, it's the particles, the components of matter, and it's the forces and fields acting on those components, and it's everything else discovered by physics in investigating matter and motion. So photons, for example, which are part of electromagnetic radiation. But this definition is also too limited. We want to say that things like water and fire are life, are physical, but they aren't talked about in, well, maybe fire is sort of, but basically they aren't really discussed in fundamental physics. And so while we want to say that fundamental physics is helping to give us a clue as to what we mean when we talk about the physical, it's not, we can't define the physical just by saying, oh, it's whatever fundamental physics talks about, because there's, in some sense, more to the physical world than that. If we think of the physical as whatever is discovered by fundamental physics, then why are these things physical? Well, we need to understand that question and that answer, why water and fire are life or physical, because we'll be thinking of the mind as physical in just the same way that we think of water and fire, and in particular life, as physical. Right? We need to understand this relationship between water, fire, and life on the one hand, and fundamental physics on the other hand, because that's going to help us understand what the relationship might be between the mind on the one hand and fundamental physics on the other hand. So we will talk about how water and fire and life might be physical in the next video, and then after that we'll be able to start actually talking about how the mind itself might be physical.